Before one of his concerts, Iggy Pop accepted a strange present from a new friend. The crowd was in for a truly disturbing night, because he didn't realise what the gift was until it was too late. There was no indication in James Newell Osterberg Jr.'s quiet childhood in Michigan that he would grow up to become the godfather of punk. His father was an English teacher and baseball coach, and little James was about as straight-laced as they come. Iggy Pop's introduction to music came in the 5th grade when he started playing the drums, but seeing as though his family had no money, his first drum set consisted of some rubber pads glued to plywood. Eventually, his parents managed to save up enough money to buy him a real drum set. For young Osterberg, music and the drums became an addiction, his first of many. He started his first band, the Iguanas, in his Ann Arbor high school days. They played covers of British invasion rock, and even though Iggy was just the drummer, he managed to hog the spotlight. He built a raised platform for his drum set, so that during their performances, he would tower over his bandmates. He clearly knew he was the star, but deep down he also knew he needed a bigger stage. After dropping out of the University of Michigan, he had a deep desire to start another band, but Uncle Sam had another idea. Iggy had a unique plan to get out of the draft. During his physical examination, he acted deranged, and he must have been good at it because it worked, though maybe that's because he kind of was. Free from the draft, Iggy started a band with brothers Ron and Scott Ashton and Dave Alexander. They called themselves the Psychedelic Stooges, and they took their name quite literally. They regularly experimented with substances and tried out new sounds. When the Psychedelic Stooges first took the stage, audiences were not ready for them. The band banged on oil drums with a hammer against the whir of a blender and the dull drone of a vacuum cleaner, far more interested in noise than music. Shockingly, the concert resonated with audiences who described the sound as powerful and hypnotic. And most importantly, Iggy himself was mesmerising. His provocative performances, which included being half naked and sometimes more than half naked, were too much for the delicate sensibilities of the late 1960s. It wasn't long before the authorities hauled him off in handcuffs to spend some time behind bars. Shortly after, the Psychedelic Stooges dropped the psychedelic from their name and released their eponymous debut album. The cacophonous recording was a seismic shift in the music industry, sparking the birth of punk rock.
Tell me about punk rock, because you don't like the label. Is that right?
I don't like to hear it come out of someone's mouth.
Okay. Where do you like to hear it come out of?
Iggy's habitual substance use would eventually take its toll on him, but not before he took a toll on himself. Over the course of his long career, he developed a reputation for gruesome self-inflicted injuries. His long trail of blood started all the way back in 1969 at a university gig in Ohio that stunned onlookers would never forget. Halfway through the performance, Iggy did the unthinkable. According to one attendee, he picked up a sharp, splintered-off piece of a drumstick and began drawing it across his bare chest. Before long, the cuts began to ooze blood. It streaked down his chest and dripped onto the stage. Despite this, he finished the show and never sought medical attention. Even the most punk rock of concert organisers had a hard time controlling Iggy Pop. In fact, despite their best efforts, they couldn't. Case in point, the Goose Lake International Music Festival in 1970, which Iggy practically turned into a full-scale riot. The organisers wanted the Stooges to perform at their event, but they wanted Iggy to tone down his usual theatrics. One of the conditions they gave him was a strict no stage diving rule. Not wanting to back out and disappoint his fans, he agreed not to leap into the crowd. But they didn't say anything about the crowd leaping onto the stage. In an effort to enforce their no stage diving rule, the Goose Lake International Music Festival organisers went to great lengths. They placed security personnel all along the edge of the stage and even built a wooden fence between the stage and crowd. Frustrated with the divisions between himself and his audience, Iggy began chanting, "Tear it down." The already restless crowd took his encouragement as the excuse they needed and began ripping away at the planks of wood that made up the fence. Unfortunately, not all of Iggy's bandmates had his steely nerves. In the ensuing chaos with an out-of-control crowd, the band's bassist, Dave Alexander, lost his nerve. As Iggy embraced the mayhem and kept performing, Alexander fumbled with his guitar and fell off beat. The mishap infuriated Iggy, and even though he had started the riot, he fired Alexander after the show. The Stooges followed up the Goose Lake fiasco with a legendary appearance at Ungano's in New York. At the start of the performance, Iggy slinked up to the microphone and, just as he was about to start singing, projectile vomited all over the stage. And that was just the warm-up. Not only did he continue his set, he upped the ante. Never shy about his body, midway through the performance, he made his way over to one of the amplifiers, unbuckled his pants, and so began a tradition of getting his junk out on stage. Iggy's penchant for regurgitating on stage became a fan favourite. For example, Andy Warhol superstar Jerry Miller, who had attended his Ungano's set, demanded an encore of his puke performance at the Electric Circus the following year. When she shouted out, "Let's see you puke," Iggy was only too happy to oblige. He walked right over and vomited all over her. Well, she did ask. But while Iggy Pop seemed like he had completely lost his mind, make no mistake, he actually took his performances very seriously. Attending a Stooges concert came with a certain risk of personal injury, potentially even by Iggy himself. That's what happened in St. Clair Lake, Michigan in 1973. The band had been devouring a watermelon backstage before their performance. Then Iggy figured that maybe his fans might have been hungry, and that gave him an idea. He emerged on stage with the half-eaten watermelon, and instead of saying hello to the crowd, he launched it at them. The rind struck a girl in the head, leaving her with a concussion. To promote their latest album, Raw Power, Iggy Pop and the Stooges booked a gig at a popular New York nightclub. But for once, Iggy might have actually taken his performance too far. As usual, he stomped his way through the crowd, stepping on tables, chairs, and unwitting fans. With one wrong step, he fell off a chair and crashed into a table filled with glasses and bottles. He popped back up without missing a beat, and the crowd cried out in horror. He was bleeding profusely from massive open gashes. Some onlookers tried to stop him, to no avail. He spent the rest of his set up on stage, flinging his body around and spraying the audience with his blood. After trying to close up his wounds with tape, Iggy's good friend Alice Cooper eventually managed to convince him to go to the hospital. Doctors in the ER stitched him up, but if he was going to get better, he was going to need a lot more than just stitches. With his substance use spiralling out of control, Iggy became paranoid and detached from reality. So when a gorilla surprised him on stage at a 1974 concert in Atlanta, he freaked out. The singer later recalled, "I was like, oh my god, what can I do? I couldn't fight him, I could barely stand. Thankfully, he wasn't in any real danger. It was just Elton John in a gorilla suit." As the original punk rocker, Iggy had no shortage of groupies, including the world's most famous groupie, Sable Starr. He met the famous party girl early on in his career when he started performing in Los Angeles. She was the ringleader of what the media had dubbed the baby groupies. They were precocious and provocative underage girls that sought out the most famous rock stars, from David Bowie to Mick Jagger. Iggy's relationship with Starr clearly crossed a line, but in the rock and roll atmosphere of the 1970s, he managed to escape the consequences of his actions. It was only decades later, in the lyrics to his song Look Away, that he confessed to sleeping with her when she was 13 and he was 23. Given his history of both on-stage and off-stage antics, it would have taken a patient woman to wrangle Iggy Pop. His first wife, Wendy Weisberg, had given up after just 2 weeks. The Japanese actress Tsuchi Asano managed to make an honest man out of him for 15 years before she threw in the towel. In 1999, just as he was finalising his divorce, he met Nina Alou, who was then working as an air hostess, and swept her off her feet. Finally, it seemed, Iggy found a woman who could handle his punk rock heat. After almost 10 years of living together, the couple finally made their relationship official and got married. Clearly, however, Iggy hadn't lost his affinity for younger women. Alou was born in 1970, making her 22 years his junior. As his addictions took over, Iggy's performances began to lose their luster, and his fans turned on him. Twice in 1974, when he attempted his trademark stage dives, his fans simply stepped aside and let him fall flat on his face. It was beginning to look like he had hit rock bottom, and there was no telling what he would do next. Iggy briefly dated the model Bebe Buell, who had some frightening stories about his off-stage antics. When she came home one day, she found him passed out in the bathtub with her 2 dogs. When he woke up several hours later, he explained that he and the dogs had simply split a bottle of Valium. Normal. Believe it or not, Bebe Buell managed to be a bad influence on Iggy Pop. She took his already out-of-control substance use issues and sprinkled them with angel dust, and not the heavenly kind. Before a show at the Kennedy Center, Buell's friend gave Iggy some white powder, but not the white powder he was used to. The stuff totally immobilized him, and the band had to play the first 15 minutes of the show without him. Eventually, his handlers had to physically lift him up and drop him next to a mic, where he mumbled some lyrics in front of a clearly disappointed crowd before taking a tumble off the stage. When the band's keyboard player Scott Thurston pulled him up, he recoiled. It looked like the singer had cut himself up again. I saw his chest. It looked like he'd cut himself up really bad. There were bits of flesh hanging on him. It was ugly to see. Thurston was relieved to find out that it wasn't flesh and blood at all. Someone had actually smooshed a PB&J sandwich into him. This guy. Things came to a head for Iggy and the Stooges when he clashed with the Scorpions, a Detroit biker gang, at their bar. The rugged bikers didn't appreciate his provocative performance and began throwing eggs at him on stage. Iggy then leapt off the stage to confront the angry bikers, but received a fist to the face as the band scrambled to safety. After this showdown, he challenged the bikers to show up at the Stooges' next concert, where they were making a live recording for their album, Metallic KO. Most sources confirm that the bikers didn't make an appearance, but Iggy didn't need them to turn the show into an all-out brawl. As the tapes were recording, he began heckling the crowd more viciously than he ever had, and the crowd decided to respond in kind. His fans had finally had enough of his deteriorating performances. As he continued heckling them, they began to throw bottles at him.
Thank you very much to the person who threw this glass bottle at my head. It nearly killed me, but you missed again, so I have to keep trying next week.
After Metallic KO, Iggy Pop and the Stooges finally parted ways, and he knew that he needed help. He checked himself into the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute in an effort to clean up his act. Following his release, he moved to Berlin with fellow rock star David Bowie. Together they attempted to stay off the illegal substances that had nearly ruined their lives, and Iggy Pop proceeded to create two of his best albums, The Idiot and Lust for Life, thanks to his time spent with Bowie. Even as he slowly weaned himself off narcotics, Iggy continued delivering controversial performances. His inclination for self-harm continued well into the 80s, even as his stardom faded. Fellow musician Bryan Adams recalled a concert performance in Brooklyn in which Iggy smashed himself in the face with his microphone. The stunt knocked out his front tooth and left Adams and the rest of the crowd asking themselves if they really saw that. Ever since kicking his substance abuse issues, Iggy's performances have toned down, and so has he. Instead, he has turned to other, less toxic substances, such as air. Now, prior to his concerts, he does at least 30 minutes of Wu Chi breathing, a deep breathing technique that leaves him feeling slightly high and dizzy.
I don't want to belong to the TV people, alternative people, none of it. I don't want to be a punk, I just want to be.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.